The call that changes everything does not announce itself as the call that changes everything. It comes on an ordinary Tuesday or a Saturday morning when you are planning to do something else, and it contains information that rearranges every assumption you had been making about the next 10 or 15 years of your financial life. I have sat with enough people in the weeks and months after receiving that kind of call. A diagnosis, a hospitalization, the beginning of a health situation that was going to require sustained management rather than a simple fix, to know that the financial disruption it produces is almost never what the person had planned for, even when they believed they had planned carefully. Not because they were irresponsible, because the planning conversation we have about health and money almost never includes the full picture of what getting seriously ill after 50 actually does to a financial life. Not just the medical bills, which are the most visible part, but the entire cascade of financial consequences that the medical bills are only the beginning of. My name is William Grant, and I want to use this conversation to describe that full picture, honestly, without softening it in ways that make it comfortable to hear but useless to act on, and to talk about what the people who navigate this situation with the most financial resilience have in common, including something specific about their income structure that most people in their 50s have never thought to address until a health crisis makes it the most important thing they wish they had addressed earlier. The first financial consequence of serious illness after 50 is the one everyone expects and almost everyone underestimates in its actual dollar magnitude: direct medical costs. Even with good insurance, the combination of deductibles, copays, out-of-network costs for specialists, medications, and ancillary services that insurance covers partially or not at all can reach amounts that would have been difficult to absorb in any single year of a working life, and that arrive at precisely the moment when the person's capacity to manage additional financial complexity is most reduced by the physical and emotional demands of being seriously ill. I have reviewed the financial documentation of people who believed their insurance was comprehensive and who discovered, in the course of a single serious illness, that their out-of-pocket exposure was 2, 3, sometimes 4 times what they had mentally budgeted for a health emergency. The number surprises them. It surprises me less because I have seen it enough times to understand that the gap between what people believe their insurance covers and what it actually covers in a serious illness is one of the most consistently underestimated financial risks in the retirement planning conversation. But the direct medical costs, as significant as they are not what most fundamentally changes the financial trajectory after a serious illness. What changes the trajectory more fundamentally is the income disruption. For people who are still working at the time of the illness, and the majority of people who become seriously ill in their 50s are still working, the illness interrupts the income that was funding both their current life and their retirement accumulation simultaneously. Short-term disability coverage, where it exists, replaces a portion of the income for a limited period. Long-term disability coverage, which many people assume they have through their employer, but whose details they have never examined, has qualifications and benefit periods that often do not provide what the person believed they had. And the retirement contributions that were compounding in the background, contributions that were doing some of the most financially valuable work of the entire accumulation period, stop when the income stops. I worked with someone named Alistair, 57 years old, a project manager who had been healthy his entire adult life and who was diagnosed with a significant cardiac condition that required a 6-month recovery period following surgical intervention. Alistair had disability coverage through his employer. What he discovered during those 6 months was that his employer's long-term disability policy had a definition of disability that did not cover his specific situation for the full period he was unable to work. That his short-term coverage replaced 60% of his base salary, but not his bonus compensation, and that the 6 months of reduced income coincided with medical bills that consumed the emergency reserve he had spent 3 years building. The retirement contributions he did not make during those 6 months compounded forward at his historical return rate over the 8 years remaining until his planned retirement, represented a reduction in his projected retirement position that was significantly larger than the medical bills themselves. The bills were the visible part of the crisis. The compounding interruption was the invisible part that mattered more over time. The second consequence that most people do not anticipate is what I call the recovery cost, the ongoing financial demands of managing a serious condition after the acute phase has passed. Managing a significant chronic condition involves specialist appointments, monitoring, medications, lifestyle modifications that have costs, and in many cases, a permanent adjustment to the pace and nature of work that reduces earned income, even when the person has technically recovered and returned to their prior activities. The retirement plan that was built on the assumption of a healthy working life through 65 or 67 does not automatically adjust for a modified version of that working life. Someone who returns to work at 60% of their prior intensity, because that is what their condition sustainably permits, is not returning to the financial plan they had before the illness. They are beginning a different plan, one that no one designed, and that requires active reconstruction from the position they now occupy. What I have observed in the people who navigate this financial reconstruction most successfully is not that they had more savings than others, though that helps. It is that they had income sources that continued operating at reduced levels or unchanged levels during and after the health disruption. Income sources that did not depend entirely on their physical presence or professional performance at full capacity for every dollar they generated. People who had built some form of income that continued without requiring them to be fully operational had a financial buffer during the crisis and a foundation for recovery that people dependent entirely on a single employment income did not have. The form of this income varied. Sometimes it was investment income from a substantial portfolio. Sometimes it was rental income from a property. And in some cases that I found increasingly interesting to examine as I encountered them, it was digital income that a person had built over the prior years by converting their professional expertise or life experience into something that continued generating revenue while they were focused entirely on their recovery. I have spent years watching the financial impact of health crises on people in their 50s, and I reached a point where I could not continue having this conversation without also offering something concrete. I put together everything I know about how people who are not wealthy, who are not particularly technical, and who are not young have built income sources that continue functioning when their physical capacity to generate earned income is interrupted. I put it in one place, not because I want to sell something, but because I kept watching people arrive at exactly the crisis I have just described and wish they had built something earlier when it would have been much easier. That resource is available right now, and the link is in the pinned comment below this video. I want to be direct about the timing. What I compiled reflects a specific window of access, and I have seen resources like this change without much notice. If the question of what you would do financially if your health interrupted your primary income for 6 months or a year is one you have not fully answered, I would rather you look at this today than find out it changed before you had the chance. The practical question this conversation is pointing toward is not whether you will face a health disruption after 50. The probability is high enough that planning for it is more realistic than planning around it. The question is what your financial position looks like if your primary income is reduced or interrupted for 6 to 18 months starting tomorrow. For most people in their 50s who have thought carefully about retirement but have not specifically stress-tested this scenario, the answer is more fragile than their general confidence in their financial preparation suggests. And the gap between the fragility and the confidence is exactly the space where the preparation I want to describe today lives. I want to share 3 people whose experiences shaped the way I think about this. Sandra, from Nashville, Tennessee, told me that she began building an online income 2 years before she was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition that made her prior pace of work unsustainable. The income she had built was not large when the diagnosis arrived, but it continued functioning during the months when she could not, and the continuity it provided changed the character of her recovery from a financial emergency into a difficult but manageable transition. Gerald, excuse me, that name is blocked. His name was Vincent, from Scottsdale, Arizona, a retired pharmacist who built a digital income stream based on his 30 years of medication knowledge, and who found that his health crisis at 61 was financially survivable precisely because one source of income had been designed not to require him to be fully present for every dollar it generated. And Catherine, from Columbus, Ohio, who told me she had been skeptical about the whole concept of online income until the 3 months she spent recovering from a serious procedure showed her, in the most direct way possible, what having no income that continued without her actually meant. She started building after her recovery. She told me she wished she had started before. The link to what I put together is in the pinned comment below. I am not going to tell you that building this kind of income takes no effort, or that the results are immediate, because both of those things would be false, and you deserve an honest description. What I will tell you is that the people who have done it consistently describe 2 things: that it was more accessible than they expected, and that the time they wished they had started was earlier than when they actually started. Both of those descriptions apply most acutely to the question this video is asking, because if a health situation arrives before you have built something, the moment to start has already passed. The pinned comment has the link. The window for this version of what I assembled is open right now, and I cannot promise you how long that remains true.